Hello, and welcome to our Cuban-inspired 7th episode of Virtual Festival 20x2020. We begin with a conversation with composer Arthur Gottschalk and welcome percussionist Jesús Pacheco for a digitally reimagined performance of our commission, Imágenes de Cuba. We wish to dedicate this program to the memory of a very special teacher, mentor, and friend, Kenneth Goldsmith, who passed away earlier this summer. Mr. Goldsmith, as his students affectionately called him, was a longtime professor of violin at the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University. He was my violin teacher for 6 years during my undergraduate and graduate studies. In addition to honing the technical aspects of playing the violin and nurturing the musical instincts in becoming an artist, Mr. Goldsmith inspired in me a passion for commissioning new music. For my senior degree recital, from his encouragement, I commissioned my first ever work, a piece for solo violin titled Capriccio by Rice faculty composer Karim Alzam. A decade later, it was Karim who I approached to write Apollo its inaugural commission, a string quartet work titled Fantasy on Bulgarian Rhythms, which would inspire the multicultural idea and the bold aims of our 20x2020 project. Over the course of this project, we leaned on Mr. Goldsmith for his expertise and musical mentorship, as he helped us interpret and perfect our commissions before their world premiere performances, Imágenes de Cuba, one of them. This is a particularly special commission given the long history of collaboration and friendship between Mr. Goldsmith and composer Arthur Gottschalk. He was more than a mentor to Apollo. He was a supporter and a fan. He was there at our very first concert in the spring of 2008 and at many subsequent programs and events as the ensemble began to find its legs. I've asked Apollo co-founder and violinist Timothy Peters, and also violinist and studio mate Jeremy Blandon, both former students of Mr. Goldsmith, to offer tributes to his memory.
Hi, I'm Timothy Peters. I'm a member of the Malaysian Philharmonic Orchestra, and I'm a former student of Ken Goldsmith's from 2001 to 2004 at Rice University. I am honored to have the chance to speak some words about our sorely missed teacher, Mr. Goldsmith. Thinking about how I would describe Mr. Goldsmith, the word that just comes up over and over again is integrity. I feel like this kind of marked every facet of his life. Integrity in who he was as a person, integrity in how he played, and also how he taught. Working with him, you develop such an appreciation for scholarship, for respect for the composers, and this is, I think, something that he taught, all of us. I came to Rice in a very difficult time for myself, dealing with a very serious injury to my neck and my arm, and I can never repay the patience and the kindness that he showed me during that really difficult time as I had to stretch my master's degree an extra year. Also, integrity and respect for how he dealt with his students after graduation. I never had a relationship with a teacher quite like I had with him, where he was always the first person that I called with any of my successes, any of my projects. As a former member a long time ago of the Apollo Chamber Players, Ken Goldsmith was our biggest supporter and believer in us from day one, and seeing the success that Apollo has rightfully earned these days, I'm sure it would not come as any surprise to Mr. Goldsmith. He always believed in us, and came to all of our concerts way back when we were at Bethany Christian Church, before we ever played at the Hobby Center or any of the other big halls. I do remember our very first concert at Zilka Hall at the Hobby Center, though. We invited Ken Goldsmith and his wife Joanne to come, and I remember Matt Dietrich had the idea of getting some complimentary tickets for them. So we arranged for free tickets under his name, because Mr. Goldsmith was a VIP to us. And I remember he found us before the concert and he refused the free tickets. And he said, "Absolutely not." He goes, how do arts organizations survive if they give away free tickets?" And he said, I don't need them. Give them give them to someone who needs them. Give them to a student or someone who's less fortunate. And he bought the tickets. He insisted, and if I recall correctly, gave Apollo a donation that evening as well. And just blown away. This is who he was, and he was always the first to support, the first to help me. We just really miss him.
So I'll never forget this one time. Mr. Goldsmith called me out of the blue several years after having graduated from school, so it was very unexpected. And he called me with such excitement in his voice about something he had just discovered in his practicing that he wanted to share with me. And he was so excited that I got out my violin too, and we worked on this scale technique together. And of course, it worked and made it better. And I think about that every day, because even after all of his decades of performing and teaching, he never stopped learning. He was always looking for new and better ways of doing things. So I think about him daily, and I miss him a lot.
Kenneth Goldsmith's twin legacies are his students and the extraordinary work of his beloved Mircourt Trio, an ensemble which commissioned and premiered nearly 100 works from a multitude of composers. It is our hope to further this meaningful legacy through the work of Apollo Chamber players.
Welcome, everybody. I'm joined here by the 4 members of the Apollo Chamber Players and by composer Arthur Gottschalk. And we're talking today about the 7th of the 20x2020 commissions that Apollo, project that Apollo has put in place. And Matt, how did this commission come about? Of all the people, all the composers in the world, how did you get hooked up with Mr. Arthur Gottschalk?
Well, to start, I'll mention that my interest in Cuba comes from being a student. I think I was in 7th or 8th grade, and we read about Bay of Pigs and a lot of the political relationship to Cuba. And I remember being entranced by the country. I remember reading a little bit more about it, and of course I didn't know about the music at that point. But I think it just Cuba stayed with me as something that I wanted to know more about. And then fast forward, when I was an undergrad at Rice University, Art Gottschalk was one of my professors. He and I think, hit it off. Actually, I was a freshman. He did a seminar class for, it was called The Acoustics of Music, and it included some musicians and some physics majors. And so it was actually really cool to kind of pollinate with them in terms of how music relates to physics. So I remember going out to eat with Art treated us all to some Thai food and regaled us with some of his stories of composing and his career, at Rice and elsewhere. And we started a relationship then. When we started the 20x2020 commissioning project, he was someone that I leaned on for advice, and he was very gracious in recommending composers to contact. As we were putting our foot in this new music scene, and I knew right away that we wanted to commission something from him. So I remember sitting in his office and asking him, "Hey, Art, so what do you think a theme for a commission would be?" And this was a couple of years in the future when I had asked him this, and immediately he said, "I'll write a piece based on Cuban folk music."
And that's how we got Imágenes de Cuba, images of Cuba. Art, what particular attachment do you have to Cuba? You're not Cuban, are you?
Not in the least. But a number of years ago, I was invited to be a featured guest at an international festival that they've had for a couple of decades in Havana called Primavera de Havana, which is springtime in Havana, and it's an international electroacoustic festival. I was denied entrance by my government for reasons that made no sense. The organizer of the festival said, "No problem, we're used to these problems with the United States. Try again next year. We'll hold the spot open for you." I tried the next year, and I got the help of the consul general at Rice University, who knew some people at the State Department. And once again, I was denied entry. And this time, though, we had a reason. And they said the reason is because I was planning on buying real estate in Cuba, and that was forbidden. It was obviously a made-up reason. So we did a little further digging. It turned out that my name was on Attorney General Ashcroft's enemies list, political enemies list.
Whoa.
My name was because there was another guy, a journalist named Arthur Gottschalk, who wrote articles critical of the Bush oil energy policy and also the Cuba policy, oddly enough. Well, so that kept me out of Cuba. When Obama became president, the university knew that I had made connections, and I'd made connections the hard way via phone and internet, which are not easy things in Cuba. And so when they decided to have their first university-sponsored trip into Cuba, they asked me to lead it, and I did. And the first two trips I took with the university into Cuba, we also had the first concerts with their National Electronic Music Studio and Rice's Electronic Music Studio. And I was blown away. I've been to Cuba 10 times now, and each time I'm blown away by the fact that the people are highly educated, highly cultured. When we had our electronic music concert there, the place was packed. Well, there's not a whole lot to do there, and people don't have much money, but concerts are free. Baseball games are the equivalent of 4 cents, but concerts are generally free. The people go to them, and we had an audience of not only a couple hundred people for those concerts, but they knew the context of this music. They were familiar with European and Russian music. So as I traveled through Cuba, I would hear country choirs that would sing folk music and Alfred Schnittke on the same concert, and with equal ease and comfort and understanding and grace. I could turn a corner and walk into a hotel bar, and the woodwind faculty from the university would be playing at the bar, because everybody needs money and everybody needs hard currency. But I mean, singers, dancers, it was incredible. The only sad thing about the musical scene in Cuba is that the instruments are in bad shape. They can't keep up with the level of performance. But this is a country where the people have a rich and varied musical legacy, and they make no distinction between folk and classical music.
So how did you approach this commission?
Well, I used to make my living as a trombone player years and years ago. And if you're a trombone player, there's only a few ways to go. There's no money in classical music or contemporary music. And in popular music, there was soul bands, which I played in many, many soul bands as part of the three-man horn line, but also Latin bands. So I played in salsa bands as well. And I'm from New York, so salsa was a big part of my life. Growing up, a great sound, a real muscular brass sound. I enjoyed that a lot. And one of the tunes that I liked from the get-go was, in English, it's called The Peanut Vendor. In Cuba, on the streets, they have vendors with paper cones with warmed up peanuts in it that they sell for a peso or so now. And the street vendors all have a different cry to identify whatever the product they're selling. And on the streets and the plazas of Havana, they sing mani, meaning peanuts. Yeah. And so the peanut song is kind of based on the street chant, but also a folk song. And I knew that was what I'd want to do. For my travels in Cuba, I learned that the song Guantanamera was more than just a Simon and Garfunkel song, that it represents 200 years of Cuban history. As a matter of fact, there's probably 200 verses to that song. It was written by Jose Marti, who is one of the national heroes of Cuba, who lived most of his life in New York. And it embodies, in many ways, the strange relationship between the United States and Cuba. So that was a song that I wanted to use and to kind of bring out, not the cheery good-naturedness of the song that so many of the pop composers do, but to show really the sadder side of that coin. And then the last moment, because we want to always end with a bang, I wanted to dive into some of the rich national dance traditions of Cuba. And there are many of them, but I lumped them all under one of the more recent ones called timba. So actually, there's a couple of other type of dance rhythms in there, but it's all one big pastiche and hopefully a lot of fun. And the viola player and then the second violinist pick up a big percussion instrument and make noise with it while the others play and so on. And then at the end, they get to holler Cuba Libre, which is the sentiment that I hope to capture with the entire piece.
Well, let me ask Annabelle to talk about this music. Have you, as an ensemble, performed any sort of music that was sort of this Caribbean or this Latin?
At the time of this commission, we really hadn't delved a lot into Latin American music. We performed a few here and there Mexican folk songs and things like that, but this was the first commission that really took us into Latin America, and so it was pretty new. And even for me, I have to say, growing up in Mexico, I did not have the chance to study or to listen to a lot of folk music. I was more trained in the classical tradition, so I learned a lot from the piece and from just listening to various versions of Guantanamera, like a lot of, I knew the Celia Cruz version, everybody knows that one, but that was about it. And so it was a really great learning experience and kind of connecting to, some of my people's rhythms as well.
Well, Whitney, I know that in addition to playing the viola in this piece, didn't you also have to play some percussion?
Why, yes, I did. So I have the honor of getting to play the shekere in the third movement, timba. And this is a, what do you call it, an apocryphal story, or maybe I've made it up. And that is that Arthur Gottschalk came to me and said, Whitney, I had a dream last night that I should give a shekere part to the violist, because I guess you had maybe seen a performance in Cuba where the violist just stood up and just started shaking in the middle of it. And I guess in your dream or whatever, you were just, that was going to be part of the commission. So
I did see that. And I did transpose you into that spot. Yeah.
Describe what that instrument is.
So it's like a hollowed out gourd with beads on the outside. So when you shake it, the beads bang against the hollow gourd. But the instrument itself has a really rich history as from Africa, if I'm not mistaken. So it's just really, there's so many layers to that instrument being used in this work.
So as the cellist, talk about, there is another dimension to this particular commission, isn't there? Because as an ensemble, you actually got to go to Cuba.
That's right. That was what an amazing experience for all of us to get to travel to Cuba and then actually record the piece at the famed Abdullah Studios in Havana. And we even got to collaborate with a Cuban percussionist, Adele Gonzalez, who added, in addition to the shekere, added multiple layers of other percussion instruments to that. So that was quite an experience, not only to get to travel and see, meet the people of Cuba in their home country, and see, like Art has been describing, how cultured and welcoming and interesting they are, but then just to experience some of the soundscapes and the sights and the smells of the place ourselves. So it was really a fantastic experience.
I'll add that, sorry, when we had the chance to be in Cuba, we also had a chance to attend a lecture by a guru of the percussion in Cuban music. So in the third movement, timba, it's all rhythms that are all combined together. And so when we attended this lecture, he showed us the clave rhythms, and he showed us just all these basic rhythms that are innate to Cuban music, because in Cuba, the people did not have a lot of access to instruments. So a lot of the African rhythms came by and they were adapted with whatever people could find. And so the tradition of percussion music grew exponentially. And so they have developed these basic rhythms that to us are very, very complicated, but to them it's inside their souls. And so to attend this lecture really kind of gave us an inside view to that tradition.
Art, were you were able to accompany them as well?
Oddly enough, before they got there, I was leading a tour group of Rice alumni for about a 9-day tour. And so when the tour group left Havana to go back to Miami, I stayed behind and went over to the studio and hung out with these guys. A funny story that goes with that, my wife was with us on the previous tour. And so I kissed her goodbye and she went off to Miami. I was staying at a very nice beach hotel. I went over to the studio. We worked all day long with them. And then we all went back to my hotel. And I was going to buy everybody dinner. It was at that point I realized that I'd sent my wife back with all the money. And they don't take credit cards. American credit cards are not honored. Well, they can't be honored. American banks will not honor bank transactions, are not allowed to honor bank transactions there. And I had in my possession exactly enough pesos to get me to the airport. And I had to be there 2 more days. This means that the next day I couldn't even call the studio to let them know that I was stranded at my hotel. I don't think we were gonna go out and we were gonna go out and see some real salseros and stuff like that. I was out of contact. I sat in my hotel room for a 1.5 days starving until I suddenly realized that breakfast was included. And I ran down the next morning and I got out of there just with my life. But they had no idea what happened to me. I just disappeared.
Matt, what was it like to be in Cuba? Was it what you expected it to be?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I like I mentioned, I've been entranced by Cuba since I was a young boy, and playing this music definitely gave me a new perspective. But actually going to this country that's been closed for so many years, you don't know what to expect. I mean, Art had told us that the people are wonderful and the culture is very rich, and we'll enjoy it. But I thought for me it was a way in a life-changing experience, because you could see some of the abject poverty. You have the music and cultural component that I think really makes Cuba one of the most interesting countries in the whole world.
So what was it like to be in Havana, Annabelle?
It's for me it was very strange in a way. Just going back to where I come from, I'm from Puebla in Mexico, which is a colonial city. So Havana is also a colonial city. And so to see the difference of how those two cities, just as architecture goes, they're actually very similar. However, Mexico saw this, the economic development and the business, and there's just businesses everywhere and, bustling activity everywhere. And then I went to Havana, and it's a completely different world that still kind of looks the same way as Puebla does, it's very interesting. It was a shock for me, but in a very interesting way. It was almost like going back in time in a sense.
In Mexico, everybody's their own entrepreneur in Mexico. So you'll see storefronts, people selling food and tamales and everything. But in Cuba, it's barren. I mean, people don't have that outlet.
I think commerce is only sanctioned by the government there. So there are little stores that are only allowed to sell like 1 brand or maybe 2 brands of water, and only a few things. So it's quite a contrast to other. I mean, I've even, had the opportunity to travel to other communist countries that are more open to the rest of the world, and they have thriving economies and you see commerce everywhere. But that was really stark difference in Cuba.
Oh, and also like for American people, we or any tourists, you're only allowed to buy things in a certain place. You cannot just go to the regular store. It's very divided, and we even had a different currency that we had to use.
You know, I think that we were very lucky to go on this like opening, this window of time where the embargo was relaxed before things were kind of shut down again. So, you know, we're very appreciative to Parma Recordings and Art for helping facilitate. You know, we were the first American chamber ensemble to perform and record in Cuba in over 50 years. So we appreciate that.
Right.
And how did they receive you as musicians? Matthew.
Well, I think again, like the Cuban people are so warm and welcoming, and I think they're so proud of their tradition, and they're so invested in their own music that they were really excited to share and to collaborate with us. So you know, and I think you felt that out on the street as well when you were just sort of wandering around. There's still that human desire to be creative. So you'd see murals and street art all over the place, and you'd hear people, you know, just playing in cafes and playing on the street.
Well, look, thank you all very much for sharing this, what must have been a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And Art, thank you very much for guiding us through the Cuban culture. And let's all now enjoy Imágenes de Cuba.
Thank you, Art.
Thank you.
Thanks, Art.
Welcome back, everyone. That was Imágenes de Cuba, the 7th commission of our 20 by 2020 project, with special guest Jesús Pacheco on percussion. Thank you so much for being part of this digital performance, Jesus. That was really amazing.
That's so much fun. It was such a fun piece, and it was so much fun to collaborate with you on that one. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, firstly, how are you and your family, and how have you been spending your time during the pandemic?
Well, you know, both of us, Ceci and I, are performers, so you can probably guess that we've been kind of adapting our way of making a living and our way of, you know, making music too, through virtual backgrounds and virtual means, actually. So a lot of video editing, a lot of sound editing, a lot of learning new things. It's been challenging and fun at the same time.
Of course, trying to make music any way we can these days. I think this
That's
is
right.
Hopefully a good example of some innovating during the time of COVID. Can you talk a little bit about how you prepared for and recorded your performance for this particular collaboration?
Yeah, so you know, because it was a recording with a performance that already happened. Obviously, my preparation was towards trying to make it as cohesive as possible. So learning the different sections of the piece, the pace that we're going, and whatever was happening during the performance, trying to adapt to that too. It was pretty interesting work, and I you know, once I came to the studio, because I'm there by myself, we also set up some cues and certain things to like coordinate it, which was something I never had to do before, but it was actually very interesting, and it turned out very well. I mean, it worked out great. It's an interesting piece, as you can see by the setup. You know, I'm playing a cowbell with my left foot, and then I have congas, bongos, a timbal, actually. I shouldn't say timbali. Timbales or timbal. Yeah. Right. So it's a timbal and a cymbal that, if you see the cymbal has some holes on it, that's the way that's how I'm capable of playing it with my hand as well. It's kind of a hand cymbal I could play with a stick too. And so it allows me to play the whole thing, you know, to set it up like that, sit down. And so it was a lot of fun, honestly, to coordinate all those things and to prepare for it. It was a fun game, honestly.
Actually, can you just list the instruments that you used?
Yeah, from left to right on my setup, I have a foot cowbell on the left foot, and then I have congas and bongos on top of the congas, and then I have a vibroslap, which is a black little thing that rattles cymbal, and the timbal and the güiro on my right hand, and I also have a second cowbell. That is the one I start the piece with underneath the cymbal. Because you know, it's not indicated on the score.
You have two cowbells.
Yeah, more cowbell.
That's a new meaning for more cowbell. Mas cowbell.
Absolutely, you can't have too many. So I have one in the hand to control, in the parts where I have to control the volume a little bit more, and it's by itself. I can play with the stick and control it better. And then when I'm playing other instruments, I'm playing it with the foot on the left foot.
Well, thanks, Jesus. Could you tell us a little bit about your background, like where you're from originally? What inspired you to become a percussionist?
Wow. So, I'm from the south of Spain. Andalusia is a big region, but I'm from Cádiz, a little town in Cádiz called Jerez de la Frontera, which is where the sherry wine is from. Actually, if you like sherry, that's where it's originally from. And, I studied percussion in Sevilla, which is 100 kilometers north from my hometown. And I mean, honestly, inspired to start playing percussion. It kind of was my toy when I was 3 years old, you know. I've always had a lot of time hitting things, I guess. And honestly, it turned into a career, but it was very funny because in my hometown, there was no percussion teacher at first. So the first thing I did was joining a band, a concert band. And that was my stepping grounds, I guess, you know, with percussion. And soon enough, I got an instructor in Sevilla, a teacher, a mentor, I would say, Iñaki Martin, which was the principal percussionist in the symphony orchestra in Sevilla. Okay. And later I became, you know, a student in the Conservatory of Music. And that's how I started, you know, but it's kind of funny that I was always also very oriented to like hand percussion, not just the classical percussion, but hand drumming and these things. And I tried to get as much information as I could back in Spain on those instruments as well and those styles of music.
Well, how did you end up in the Bayou City? How did you end up in Houston?
Wow. Well, I met my wife and we met in Germany in summer of 2009 at a festival in Stuttgart. We started a long distance relationship, which I don't recommend to anybody. And later, after many intercontinental trips, I finally jump over. And I'm very happy that I moved to Houston, honestly.
Well, it's a great place to be as a musician. And, even though we did this apart, we're planning to do this collaboration live in person in a theater at some point. We were supposed to do this at Miller Outdoor Theater this past July, but those plans were changed. But it'll happen eventually in the future here. So thank you so much, Jesus, for your talent and your artistry. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, guys. I hope we get to do that soon. Thank you.
We definitely will.